In the early hours of Friday 26th of July 2019, just after 12:10 a.m, the streets of Chessington in southwest London were nearly silent. Along Moor Lane, three friends walked slowly. They had been out at the pub, nothing unusual. Earlier, there had been brief heated arguments. Then it fizzled out. Silence returned in the air, but heavier than before. Then, from behind them, two headlights lit up the road. What happened next was not a crash, not a hit and run. It was something else entirely. A car used not to flee, but to hunt. The people inside the car didn't stop. They didn't call for help. Instead, they disappeared. What followed was a sprawling manhunt, a trail of evidence, and a community too afraid to speak. This is the story of Liam Dent, and how a pub row turned into one of the most calculated, cold-blooded killings the Met had seen in years. To most people in Chessington, Liam Dent wasn't someone who drew attention. He didn't move loud, he wasn't looking for trouble. At 25, he was building something of his own, a mobile food business, Caribbean street food, freshly made, aimed at festivals, markets, and community events. He called it Pull Up, Fill Up, and it was more than just an idea. Liam had two children, a 10-year-old daughter and a toddler son. Friends described him as soft-spoken and focused. His partner said he was grounded. Everything he did with his kids in mind. He lived locally, not far from Moor Lane. He worked when he could, saved what he earned, and put most of it back into building his future. The van, the equipment, and the start-up steps, it all mattered. There were no reports of violence, no past clashes with the law, no known links to any groups or gangs. Just a young father trying to make something for himself in a town he knew. He wasn't the sort of person people expected to see on the front page. But on the night of the 26th of July 2019, his name would spread further than he ever intended. Not for the food, business, or the family he loved, but for something no one could have predicted. Something brutal, calculated, and entirely undeserved. Martin Eastwood was 22 years old, from Epsom. By the time he stepped behind the wheel that summer night, his history was already clear and dangerous. In 2018, he deliberately drove into a cyclist. The man was thrown from his bike, seriously injured, and left on the road. The bicycle was dragged 20 meters under the car. Then a year later, Eastwood tried to rob a man walking with his girlfriend. He didn't use a weapon. He used a car, drove straight at them. Another near miss. He didn't see cars as a way to get around. He used them to cause harm, again and again. Daniel Morris, also 22, was close to Eastwood. A friend or a follower. On the surface, he kept quieter. But on the night it mattered, he was in a second stolen car. Not behind the wheel of the S-Max, but driving in convoy. And not by accident. They had planned to do something much darker. We will discuss it in a few minutes. Then there was Jasmine Robinson, Eastwood's girlfriend and just 19 years old. She wasn't there for what happened on the road, but she played her part after. Not in panic or overwhelmed, but deliberate. She helped Eastwood avoid the police. We will discuss this later in this video. None of them were hardened criminals in the traditional sense. No drugs or armed robberies. But their violence wasn't chaotic. It was targeted, personal, and often carried out behind the wheel. By July 2019, one thing had become clear. When things escalated, Eastwood didn't use fists or reach for a weapon. He got in a car. Now let's get into what happened next, and how they returned, not to argue, but to settle it in their own way. Liam Dent had been out with friends, which we have already covered. They weren't far from home, just down at the Lucky Rover, a pub on Hook Road in Chessington. They drank, talked and laughed that night. No one expected anything to go wrong. But outside, after closing time, a row began. It wasn't clear what started it, and none of the reports ever said. But two groups crossed paths near the car park. One included Liam and his friends. The other, Martin Eastwood, Daniel Morris, and at least one more. Witnesses described it as fast and tense, a row that spiraled quickly. No weapons were drawn, but when someone from Liam's group hurled a pub sign, it smashed the windscreen of a grey Volvo, the car Daniel Morris had been driving. What had started as words now felt personal. After that, both groups left and no one followed anyone. It looked like it was over, but it wasn't. What no one knew at that moment was that Eastwood and Morris had access to more than just the Volvo. Both men left the area and returned shortly after, and this time, they weren't coming back to talk. They were in stolen vehicles now. Eastwood behind the wheel of a Ford S-Max, Morris following in a black BMW. All three cars later linked to the group. The Volvo, the BMW and the S-Max were running on false number plates, and both had been reported stolen weeks earlier. The S-Max had gone missing on the 11th of July, just 15 days before the killing. These weren't their daily cars, instead they were burner cars. The type you don't keep and torch when you're done. CCTV later captured both cars moving together through Chessington just minutes before the hit. No one from Liam's side could have seen that coming. But for Eastwood, the damage to the Volvo wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning. At 12:10 a.m., the Ford didn't slow down. It accelerated, straight at Liam. He was struck with force, knocked beneath the vehicle and trapped underneath it. And then the car kept going. Witnesses described hearing screams, not just from the people nearby, but from Liam himself. One recalled hearing someone shout, "Oh, Bruve," just as the engine roared and the Ford pulled away. Another remembered the sickening sound of dragging, of tires turning and metal grinding. The Ford S-Max drove for half a mile with Liam trapped underneath. Along the road, police would later find a trail, a single trainer, shredded banknotes, his skin, a torn phone case, and the scraping marks of a body being pulled along tarmac. The car zigzagged down Moor Lane at speeds of up to 32 miles per hour. Eventually, Liam's body was dislodged. Not because the driver stopped, but because a second vehicle clipped the Ford, forcing his body free. That vehicle was driven by one of Liam's friends who had been trying to stop the chase. By the time anyone reached him, it was too late. Liam was still alive, but his injuries were so severe that paramedics could do nothing. At 12:50 a.m., he was pronounced dead at the scene. Martin Eastwood never stopped and never looked back. He drove off into the night, the Ford S-Max disappearing with him, as well as BMW and Daniel Morris. But what he didn't know then was how much of the trail he had left behind. When police arrived on Moor Lane in the early hours of the 26th of July, the scene was brutal in its clarity. Liam Dent's body lay in the road. Officers started walking the road backwards, from where Liam had been left, all the way back towards Osborne Way. Along the route, every few meters, another piece of evidence. The violence wasn't hidden. It was laid out, almost as if marked. And then came the next discovery. Just before 2 a.m., calls came in from Cyclamen Way in Epsom. A car on fire. It was the Ford S-Max, burnt out, reduced to a shell. It matched the vehicle described by witnesses and caught on CCTV earlier that night. But the S-Max held something the killers didn't expect: its telematics system. Police forensic teams retrieved the black box. Inside, a complete record of the vehicle's movements. Time-stamped GPS data, speeds, acceleration patterns. The data painted a detailed picture of that night's route, the exact moment the car hit Liam, how far it dragged him, where it turned, and where it stopped. They also recovered CCTV from several roads, showing the black BMW along with the Ford S-Max and a grey Volvo. The Volvo V40, seen earlier in the evening during the row outside the Lucky Rover, was later found torched on Alexandra Road in Epsom. The BMW, driven by Daniel Morris, had been abandoned and left intact. Bit by bit, the police stitched together the timeline. The roads, the cars, the aftermath. Each forensic detail told a part of the story, and none of it could be undone. The technology and the brutality of the scene had left a trail they couldn't burn away. As we discussed earlier, within hours of Liam Dent's killing, he had vanished, slipping away from the streets of Chessington as quietly as he had stormed through them. He avoided his name and stayed out of the driver's seat after the incident. When it came time to leave, someone else handled the escape. That job fell to Jasmine Robinson, 19 years old at the time and Eastwood's girlfriend. She booked a coach ticket to Sheffield for him under a false name, helping him flee the area completely. Police later confirmed the booking details had been manipulated to avoid tracking, giving Eastwood a head start as the manhunt kicked off. But what they couldn't erase was the trail of messages they left behind. Texts between Eastwood and Robinson revealed the emotional chaos that followed the killing. In one, she told him bluntly, "You fucked it all up, and for what?" A couple of seconds of empowerment. In another, she poured out anger and love all at once, talking about everything they had planned, now thrown away. The messages swung from anger to affection and confusion to blame. But beneath it all, they both knew. This was serious. One was trying to vanish and the other was helping him disappear. As detectives combed through CCTV, phone records, and forensic evidence, they started to connect the people behind the night of violence. Daniel Morris, Eastwood's friend, was arrested and later admitted his role in court. Jasmine Robinson, meanwhile, had been more covert, but not careful enough. Police traced the coach booking to her through surveillance and communication records. Despite using a false name, which we discussed earlier, metadata and transaction information led back to her. Combined with her text exchanges and witness accounts, it was enough. She was arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. 10 people were arrested in the days and weeks after, all between 17 and 22 years old. Many were questioned on suspicion of murder or attempting to pervert the course of justice. Most were eventually released under investigation, but the network was being slowly pulled apart. The manhunt for Eastwood intensified. Officers tracked movements, reviewed phone data, pieced together what they could from the trail he and his girlfriend had left behind. By now, it wasn't just about what had happened on Moor Lane. It was about who had tried to run from it and who had helped him. On 15 August 2019, the man who had been at the center of it, Martin Eastwood, was arrested and charged with murder. By October, the charging decisions crystallized, and one by one, the names that had been spoken in whispers outside a pub were written into charge sheets. The net hadn't fallen in a sweep. It had been drawn slowly and deliberately until there was no room left to move. His mother, Stacey Dent, was among the first to arrive. She rushed to her son's side, dropped to the ground, and held him in her arms. She later described the moment in painfully clear words. "When I arrived, I knew my son wasn't alive. I could see the absolute destruction of what happened to him. There were attempts to save him, to keep him with them, but they all knew the truth. His injuries were catastrophic, beyond what a body could survive." Later, Stacey would stand in a courtroom and speak directly to her son's killer, saying, "I could see all his injuries. I realized he had to be in so much pain. I could see immediately, despite the attempts to keep him with us, that he was not going to survive. My heart was completely ripped apart, and it remains that way. I cry every single day." Her voice, though filled with grief, was firm. "He was tortured. He was left for dead, screaming for help. Why couldn't you have just stopped and spared my son his life?" Liam's partner, Maisie Johnson, echoed that same pain. The two shared 2 young children, now left without their father. In a public appeal, Maisie begged anyone with knowledge of what happened to come forward. "My children have lost their father, and I have lost my soulmate." But despite media coverage, CCTV footage, and repeated police statements, there remained a troubling silence across the community. People had been there, people had seen what happened, or knew who was involved, but many stayed quiet, out of fear, out of loyalty, or just out of the desire to stay out of it. Stacey addressed this directly. "I know that there were lots of people who saw what happened. I know how scared people are to come forward, but this is a callous crime. I don't have any doubt this person will do it again." That silence, perhaps more than anything, haunted the family. And through every press appeal, every court date, and every interview, they returned to one word, one goal, one thing they wanted more than anything else: justice for Liam, for his children, and for the family left behind. At the Old Bailey on the 6th of April, 2022, a month after the jury's murder verdict on the 7th of March, the case was set out in full for sentence. The prosecution's picture was methodical. They presented the case with all the evidence we have covered earlier. Sentences followed one by one. Martin Eastwood, 22, from Epsom, received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years for murder. He was also given concurrent terms for grievous bodily harm with intent and robbery, and a 10-year driving ban to begin on release. Daniel Morris, 22, of no fixed address, had admitted manslaughter before trial. He was sentenced to 5 years and 6 months. Jasmine Robinson, 19, from Epsom, was convicted of assisting an offender. She received 2 years imprisonment, suspended for 2 years. What do you think about the sentences and the case itself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more true UK crime stories told exactly as they happened, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. There's always another case to uncover.